Hello, everybody. Welcome to the latest episode of Vox Vomitus, otherwise known as Word Vomit. I am your host, Jennifer Ann Gordon, the author of the novels Beautiful, Frightening, and Silent, as well as the Hotel series, which includes From Daylight to Madness and When the Sleeping Dead Still Talk. With me, as always, is my Vox Vomitus vixen, Allison Martine, author of the Bourbon books, including the very newly released Move On Melinda. With us today is author Nicki Chen, who has just released on April 27th, I believe. She told me, and I've already forgotten, her novel, When in Vanuatu. I was going to say it wrong. Woo! So, Nicki, welcome to Vox Vomitus. Tell our viewers a little bit about yourself and about your new release.
Okay, well, I came a little bit late to writing. I started out of college as a kindergarten teacher for a little while. And then I taught ninth grade Spanish for a little bit less than 1 year. In those days, back then, they didn't want teachers to come to class pregnant. And I got married in between the kindergarten teaching and the Spanish teaching, and they decided to let me be their first teacher to teach all the way to 8th month.
Hey!
But anyway, that was sort of the end of my teaching career. I'm sort of a small town girl from Cedro-Woolley, Washington, which is also where I met my Chinese husband. He was, I think, the only Chinese in town at the time, and married him. And we had 3 lovely daughters, as they always say. And just weeks after the 3rd one was born, my husband got a new job in the Philippines, and we moved to Manila. So it took a long time before I got to writing. There weren't any good writing courses that I knew of in Manila, but I signed up for one of the low residency writing courses from Vermont College of Fine Arts, and did some of it online. Well, we weren't online in those days. Did some of it by mail, and took 2 trips to Vermont a year until I finished my MBA or MFA. And that's how I got started on writing.
Wow,
So
that's incredible.
I'm still confused by the whole they wouldn't let teachers come to class pregnant. Are they worried it's contagious?
I think so.
I think that, I think they thought it was embarrassing.
Okay, I know the Spanish word is similar, embarazado, embarrassed,
right.
but I'm just confused by this just because, I'm sure it was different in different times, and maybe there were standards about where a woman should be when she's pregnant, but I'd never heard that. I remember having pregnant teachers. So this is just, my brain's just kind of sputtering on that, going, all right, let's move on because I'm going to be on that for a while.
I know. Well, I'm still on it because you were married. Like you were a married woman.
Yeah. My sister and I have been talking about this recently, and we think it has something to do with, even though we had baby showers and everybody loved babies, something about the idea of being pregnant was too much talking about sex.
Yeah, I was just wondering if maybe it would lead the 9th grade children to start thinking about sex during Spanish class.
Yes, I don't know.
How did that baby get there?
How did that baby get in your belly? You're a teacher. You're not supposed to have sex.
Yeah.
Well, there is part of that too, because I know my mother was a librarian, and before that, a substitute teacher. And if we ran into students outside of the school, like in a grocery store, and we still have it now because my husband's a teacher, if students run into you in real life, they freak out because they're like, you live in the classroom. Who let you out? You can't possibly exist outside. So a teacher getting pregnant raises a lot of questions about just existential nature of where the teachers belong. Clearly not in the bedroom.
So you moving to Manila with your husband and your 3 daughters, being an expat for, was it 27 years?
No, about 20 years.
About 20 years. So that is a lot of your inspiration behind your novel. Yes.
Yes.
So I'll admit I'm really fascinated by being an expat. Like I've never done that, but I love reading books about it. Just understanding like the huge cultural change, can you tell us a little bit about going from, Washington State, teaching in a school to all of a sudden I'm in Manila, and I'm assuming you're in Manila and you have a staff, you have a maid and a cook and all of these things.
Yeah, there were lots of things to adjust to. The maid is one thing. When we arrived in the airport, my husband's boss met us, and he had a maid with him, and he said, "This is my maid, and she has a cousin that would like to be your maid if you agree." And so we agreed, and here we were in what they called this apartment hotel before we found a house, and she was with us the first or second day. And one of my first barriers to get past is, what about eating? Isn't she going to eat at the table with us? So I invited her to eat at the table with us, and she flatly refused. "No, ma'am, I can't do that." And so she found another little table and ate at the other table. So, there are so many strange things to get used to. And actually, when you rent an apartment or rent a house, there are maids' quarters as part of it. And actually, they like to have another maid with them, so they have company. And there's lots of friendliness between the employer and the maid, but everybody, I hate this phrase, has her own place. And so that was really something hard to get used to. And I think another thing is it makes, although it's very nice to have help, on the other hand, it means you never have any simple tasks to do. You have to find other things to do. And when you have a little bit of housework, it's relaxing, it's time off from, some cooking is maybe too much work, but on the other hand, it's something a little bit creative to do and doesn't take too much of the same kind of effort that you're doing when you're doing something else.
So in those early days when you were in Manila, you had 3 small children, so I'm sure they kept you incredibly busy. But with having all of this sudden extra time of not having to do the dishes and not having to prepare the meals, what did you, Nicki Chen, do? How did you occupy your time? I know what your character Diana does, but
Diana doesn't have 3 little people.
Right, exactly.
Right. Yeah. There was lots of socializing. We have to meet my husband's co-workers and their families. There was lots of dinner parties, so you have to go to the market and supervise and cook that. I took Chinese brush painting. There's a Chinese brush painting behind me that I painted.
Oh, is that one yours?
Yeah.
Oh, I love it.
So, and all the other women had things like that to do. Manila has a very large expatriate community, and you want to get to know Filipinos, but you also live in the midst of this very large community of other people who've left their home and who, work with your husband or with, like all the embassies and the corporations and so forth. So,
well, and that's one of the things that I thought was interesting, because I guess in my head, when I think of expats, I usually think, oh, they're all American, but the characters in your book come from a variety of locations. Yeah. So what they have in common is that none of them belong there, but they don't all come from the same place. So who were some of the people that you were with? Was it mostly Americans, or was it a big variety like what you have in the book?
It was a big variety. Our kids first they went to a cooperative nursery school, so that also kept me busy. Working there and eventually becoming the president of the nursery school for a while. And then they went to the international school, and this international school had, I think, 11% Americans, and yet the Americans were the largest group. So
wow.
It was really
everybody.
Yeah. And they had mostly Filipino teachers.
So what year did you move there?
1971.
Oh, wow. So I know in your book, it's in the late 80s and the early 90s. Um, so I didn't realize you were there so early.
Yeah.
So did you come back and forth to United States very often?
In the beginning, no. Our first home leave was after 3 years.
Wow.
So the baby had never been back to the United States since she was 3 weeks old.
Wow.
And she made all kinds of funny comments. You know, she saw a boat on a trailer and says, "Look, that boat has wheels." And we went hiking in the woods, and she had to pee. She'd never done that. We had to really encourage her because there's no other place to go. And then when she got back to the Philippines, she thought she could do that out in the yard.
Oh, gosh.
No.
Girls.
So since you were so far away from the United States and you were gone for so long, and it was such a strange time in our history in the United States because, you know, the sexual revolution and feminism and all of these things were happening here in our country. Was it strange to be back and forth? Like when you would come here, did you sort of feel out of place, or did it just feel like you were stepping right back into home?
Well, we usually visited relatives, so it did feel like stepping back into home. We didn't have very good communication. I mean, we read the Philippine papers, but was very little. It was mostly local news, but we sort of kept up on what was happening. I think in 1970, we had an idea, for example, that a woman's role is changing, and yet then we get to the Philippines and the international community with people from all over, and there's another role for women among various groups, you know, especially the Asians.
And what was that like for you to go from being in Washington to then going there? And how did you find your place? Was that a hard adjustment for you?
In a way, it wasn't, because if you move to a new city in the United States, sometimes it takes a long time to make friends. But in the international community, you start right away with a group that's your group, and there were women's clubs and lots of things set up for people that didn't have their family here.
Yeah, that extended network that kind of becomes its own family.
Right.
Be able to do that.
Yeah.
So how long were you living in Manila before you decided to start writing?
Maybe 15 years. I thought I would come back and teach. And so I was involved a lot in education after working at the nursery school. This is all volunteer work. I was on the school board of the international school. And I thought, you know, good practice for when I go back and teach. And then for a couple of years, I was an assistant to the superintendent. So that kept my finger. And then I thought, we're staying here longer than I thought. This isn't going to work. By the time I get back to the United States, I will be just rusty. I won't know how to teach anymore, and teaching will have changed. And so I started looking around
For just something to do to fill your creativeness.
Well, not only that, to be something to be serious about. Not, you know, I studied batik. That was very interesting, but I never thought that would go anywhere. That was just fun. So
that was more just to enrich you and give you some kind of a sample of the culture and what a cool technique to learn. I would love to do batik, but I am not visually oriented. I leave the art to Jen.
That's a lot of pressure you just put on me.
Mm-hmm. That's okay. Well, so this wasn't your first novel. The first one is Tiger Tail Soup.
Yes.
And is that one also inspired by some of your time living in Asia?
No, that was inspired by my husband. Oh dear, does that make?
I don't know which of this is ringing.
Oh, Okay.
We can just ignore it.
Just ignore. Okay.
It's fine.
When I started dating my husband, I found out that he was a great storyteller. So he told me stories about his childhood in China and during the Japanese invasion and occupation. And I thought, that's so interesting. So that was my inspiration for the first novel. And actually, I didn't start writing it until after he died, so I couldn't ask him questions.
So you couldn't clarify. So I'm not sure I have this detail right. You just had to hope that you did it justice. But that sounds like such a lovely tribute to him then as well, to write it after he passed. What was that like for you?
Well, I was a little worried about his family. And a couple members of his family thought, maybe it's not up to her to write it. She might get something wrong and so forth. So it was worrisome.
So that was, oops, sorry.
But I enjoyed writing it.
So that was your first full-length book. Were you writing before that? Were you dabbling in short stories, poetry, essays?
I was writing short stories, yeah.
Now, do you have a specific genre that you started working in? Has it always been women's fiction with like a slant towards like almost memoir, or did you branch out when you first started and said like, I'm going to write a sci-fi novel, or I'm going to write a ghost story?
Actually, my short stories were inspired also by living in Vanuatu, because that's when I was taking my MFA. So.
Very nice. Yeah. Well, and I was curious, as far as the language goes, you mentioned that you were a Spanish teacher. And then when you were in the Philippines, was that at all helpful to you? Were people there speaking Spanish, or did you have to learn other languages?
Almost no one spoke Spanish. I mean, they had been a Spanish colony for, I think, 300 years, but the very rich spoke Spanish. Just the rich people whose relatives came from Spain still spoke some Spanish, but most people didn't. And most people spoke English in Manila. I picked up a few Tagalog words, but not much. I was trying to study Chinese. I think I was kind of old to learn a new language, especially a difficult one like Chinese. I had a tutor come over for a while.
Well, and I don't know much about Vanuatu. It's one of those words that I know, but I had to actually look it up on a map to figure out, okay, where is this? It's not a place I'm familiar with. And so as far as the culture there, it's what you kept referring to do you pronounce it Ni Vanuatu or Nai Vanuatu as the indigenous people there?
Yeah.
And so what kind of language did they speak? Because I got kind of a feeling that it was kind of a place in transition because it had been colonized at different times. But then also if you're with expats, maybe you didn't come in contact with them to speak whatever language was more prevalent there among the community that was local.
The language is really an interesting situation. They are supposed to have more languages per capita, I guess is the way you would say it, than any place in the world, because it's like every village or two has its own language.
Wow.
They were a colony. They were a condominium. They were a colony of France and England at the same time. France and England couldn't decide who got it.
So they just shared.
So they shared. And that has had, repercussions up to now. They have some people who go to the French school and some people who go to the English school. They had a French and an English police force. They had a court system the same court system, but they had a Spanish judge, even though no one spoke Spanish. And the Spanish judge was said to be almost deaf. So I don't know. Oh. It was very strange. But
I'm a little worried for the justice system there, but go on.
What I'm hearing is that's the best place to commit crimes.
Yeah.
Well, but I'm also thinking, and I don't want to have any spoilers about your book, about there is a jail. Was the jail that you mentioned in Vanuatu referenced, was that something that's a real place? Or that was okay. And did it have the security concerns that you mentioned in the book, or was that something that you took some liberties with?
I think all of that I got from local gossip.
Gossip.
I didn't.
Gossip.
Substantiated.
I didn't finish the languages. The national language is Bislama, which is it grew from Pidgin English in the days when it was about the 1860s, and the United States was consumed with its Civil War, and so there wasn't enough cotton and sugar cane, I guess it was. So Australia started, planting more fields and looking for more workers. And they went around the islands, and sometimes they gave people a job and said, "We'll bring you back when we're done with you in 3 years," or something. And didn't usually follow that. But they also just kidnapped people. That was called blackbirding. And when they got to Australia, they put them on different crews from their village mates, so they wouldn't be able to communicate too well. So the only way they could communicate was work with a Pidgin English that they learned from the overseers. And that developed pretty well. And actually it developed into something more than Pidgin English. I guess linguists call it Creole, where they, I think they incorporated part of their grammar, which seems to be related to the grammar from Papua New Guinea. So that's the national language. And I think a lot of Ni Vanuatu speak 3 languages: their village language, Islama, and French or English.
Pick one.
Just one.
Yeah.
Except for the judge who speaks Spanish, but is deaf. So,
So your main character, Diana, she is an artist, or she grows into becoming an artist and being like fulfilled with her art as part of like her journey. And I was wondering how much of that was based on you, and if it was based on you, do you still have some of these little doodles and sketches that she would or you would draw?
No, I don't. I'd like to. I think that's kind of fun. I think it's sort of like writing in a journal where you doodle with words.
well, one of the scenes that I liked, and this isn't so much of a spoiler because it's very early on, is she's writing these letters home and she's incorporating these political cartoons. But one of them references a situation that becomes a lot more serious. And then she's like, I don't think I can do a cartoon about this, because all of a sudden it went from being something everyone's kind of annoyed by to, oh, this might upset and topple our whole government. And I've got friends who could get hurt. So maybe this isn't the time to just make light of it. I'll just stay here like I was told to and not get shot on the streets.
So what was the political climate like in Manila in the 70s? Because I don't know anything really about it.
I think in 1971, Ferdinand Marcos was president, just regular president. Then in 1972, he declared martial law, which was, less than a year after we got there. All of a sudden, in the middle of the night, we got phone calls. He's declaring martial law. He's declaring martial law. Everybody stay in. There's a curfew. And my husband was very serious. Don't go out. This is terrible. But then by lunchtime, he was way too curious. So we
Lunchtime?
By lunchtime.
Like the first day lunchtime?
First day lunchtime. So we piled in the car.
I think that tells us everything we would need to know about your husband, of being like, stay inside. Okay, we're going out.
Yeah. And we went to a Filipino restaurant. And at the Filipino restaurant, there were soldiers of the National Guard eating. So anyway, we continued eating. But we were under martial law for a long time, which, it became not so serious. You got used to it. People standing in front of the bank with their M16.
Yeah, you just get used to it after a while, because if nothing happens and it's just part of what you're used to seeing every day when you're out.
But of course, at the same time, Marcos is gathering power.
Mm-hmm.
So for the Philippines and for its people, it's getting more and more serious. we had a curfew for a while. You just had to be careful if you went to a party to look at your watch and go home at the right time. And then I think it was 1983 or so, that was what you've probably heard of, the People Power Revolution. And before that happened, my husband knew someone at the American Embassy who probably was CIA, who told him there's going to be blood in the streets. So our kids and I went back to the United States for a while, and they went to high school there for a while. And during that time, I was traveling back and forth a lot, you know, spending some months here and some months there. And when I was in the Philippines, my mom was staying with the kids, cooking for them and so forth.
Was it a big culture shock for your kids to come back to the United States and not have a maid? Did they have to clean their own rooms and stuff?
Not so much. My oldest daughter still doesn't see the purpose in making her bed. And
I agree with that.
Her husband who's never makes his bed either. My second daughter is messy as can be. I guess, I don't know if I should say this over the line, but
she could be listening.
She would have been messy either way. And the third daughter is very neat, so who knows? But one of the things I remember is my oldest daughter went to a PEP assembly, and she, you know, you sort of have to be brought up on something like a PEP assembly. She just thought it didn't make sense. Why would anybody do this? It's so crazy.
I was brought up on them, and I still think that. I'll be honest. Like, why are we here? Why are we shouting so much?
I was just happy to be out of class.
Yeah, there was that too.
Yeah. And I think also the Philippines is very hot, so they were a little bit behind on sports. And coming late in high school, it was hard to get on a team because you hadn't been so seriously working on sports all that time.
So was there a reason you chose to set your novel later on during that time versus some of the earlier years when you were first moving to the Philippines?
Because I started with Vanuatu. So I knew Vanuatu from that time.
And so Vanuatu, so the time you were in Vanuatu, did that actually line up to when it is in the book as far as years, as far as like early 90s? Okay.
Right.
Well, that makes sense. Because then if you were into the Philippines that whole time, you can draw from any kind of point and give that experience. But you want to say, this is what the slice of Vanuatu was when I was there. And I think we missed a comment from Laurie Schoenfeld. I think she was saying hi.
But I think she was saying hi.
I didn't see beyond that. It flashed and then it came down too quickly. But that's okay.
I will say the food in your novel is almost like a ritual, and the types of things that your characters are eating and consuming, you're like painting with food. Are you a foodie? Is it something that
not really, but we had a lot of dinner parties, and I mean, food is always sort of an occasion for getting together with people. And Asians are very big on food. And then when you're in an international community with people from various countries, oh boy, I've never had such good Indian food than when you go to an Indian person's house. Or Vietnamese food. Oh, I know someone who is such a good Vietnamese cook.
You're making me hungry when you said Indian food. I was just like, starving. That's my favorite.
Well, and I think there's no quicker way to get to know a culture than to see their food. And when you've got all these people coming together, sharing that little bit of themselves, that's just awesome. But I mean, I loved all the food that you had in your book because it really gave a sense of where they are in time and what was trending as far as what kind of restaurants they were going to. There's a scene there where everybody's ordering paella and getting that sense of, okay, well, here you are in a country in Asia, but you're having a Spanish dish, and that shows the cultural influences carrying down through colonization and all of that. But are some of these dishes you've made yourself, or are all these ones that you just referenced from getting to eat in the past?
I think more getting to eat.
That is fair.
That's the best kind of food. It's just when you get to eat it and not have to make it yourself.
Have you had the black paella?
No, but I've had lots of squid in its own ink, which is good.
We've just killed Jen. I'm sorry, Jen.
I'm like, yeah, I'm a vegetarian. So. But I will say there were things that you mentioned in your book that I was like, this can't be real. So I whipped out my phone and I'm like, oh God, yeah, that is real. Gross. But also like weirdly intriguing.
Well, there was one reference in there to somebody may have wanted to eat a bat. Nobody ate a bat, but there was discussion of bat, and I was just going, don't eat the bat. We know where this goes.
I know.
It's not going to end well for anyone.
This ends with COVID.
Somebody served it at a party in Vanuatu, and I ate some.
You ate flying fox?
Yeah. It was fine.
But was this cooked already, or was this like the wet market where they're eating the bat while it's still like?
It was like barbecued or something.
I went on
so many questions. I'm like,
well, that's okay. I went on a vacation, and I won't name where I was, but we went inner tubing through a river, and the guide who was then touring us to have our barbecue lunch, we were having chicken, but he kept saying, "It's chicken. It's iguana." No, I'm kidding. It's chicken. It's iguana. But he just kept going back and forth, and we're looking at it, look at the bone size, going, I mean, I'm not opposed to eating iguana, but there were iguanas everywhere looking at us, and I felt really bad. Like, am I eating someone you know?
I know the iguana's like,
that's my cousin. But I don't think I could. I don't think I could eat a bat. But maybe if I didn't know it was a bat. I like bats.
I like bats. They're so cute. Unless they like accidentally fly in your house. That's not cute.
You had one in your house not that long ago. Didn't you have one in your closet?
Yeah, it wasn't a bat. It was a mouse.
Just soaring across the room, but it's fine.
I could hear it like scuttling down, and for some reason, I don't know why, I immediately went to there's a bat in my closet flying around during the middle of the day.
It's because you write horror. Of course, it's a bat. It's going to turn into a vampire.
I know. I was really convinced. I was just.
But Jen lives out kind of where animals will just show up and do stuff. So that's not all that unexpected.
Exactly.
But in my place, I'm like 2 minutes from a freeway. If I had a bat in my house, I'd be like, "How did you get here? Are you escape?" I take it back to the zoo because the zoo is more likely than it just showing up in the wild.
Well, there's I think a Bengal tiger on the loose in Chicago.
Texas. Is it Chicago? I thought it was Texas for some reason.
There's one in Texas.
Yeah, Texas. Okay.
But yeah, because I heard something about there are more tigers in Texas than anywhere else outside of Africa. I don't really want to know. My sister lives in Texas. I'm sure she could explain some of it. But that just tells you a lot about Texas. Elisa von Schulman asks, Nicki, do you miss living in the Philippines and Vanuatu? And if you do miss it, did writing this book enhance or dissipate it?
I seem to enjoy things while they're happening. It doesn't mean it has to go on forever. So, yeah, I think writing about it was nice. Someone that I know said on Facebook recently, something about live in the moment and so forth, as though the past has no purpose. But I think it's good to be able to remember the past. Doesn't mean you're going to live it again.
Well, as far as living it again, have you gone back to visit since you have moved away?
No.
Oh, really?
Oh. Do they have a stoplight yet? Do you know?
Do they have a stoplight yet? In Vanuatu. Yes. Manila has one.
And Manila has probably
lots.
So are you working on anything now? Are you working on a new project?
I'm trying to write a few more short stories to go with the ones I already have and make a collection.
Ooh, fantastic. And are these all about your time in Asia, or?
I'm using the South Pacific as a backdrop, but just making other things up.
That's great. Now, do you write slow? Does it take you, or are you fast? Like, what is your writing process like?
I wish I were faster, but I'm slow.
Do you outline and plot, or do you just fly by the seat of your pants like we do?
Pantser.
Pantser, yes. So you understood before we went live when we were just having the conversation of like, I'm writing something and I have no idea what's going to happen now.
Yeah.
It makes it exciting.
So exciting. I was surprised and I wrote it.
Sometimes I outline the next chapter. You know, it's like, this needs to continue on, and something needs to happen about that I was working on. And this would be interesting to be in that chapter. So I do look ahead a little bit. That's about it.
One chapter at a time.
Yeah, I've seen different charts, and I think that's kind of along the line of the flashlight discovery writer. Like I can see a little bit ahead of mine, but only about as far as that flashlight goes, which I would say is about one chapter.
Yeah.
Like ending? No idea. I mean, I had a glimpse of what the ending for what I'm working on now could be, and I went, well, that's not right. I shouldn't know that yet. So if I know that, that's probably wrong. So I'm like putting it aside and going, okay, that's considerate, but probably no.
Yeah, I didn't know how When in Vanuatu was going to end until I got fairly close to it.
Well, and I know that I didn't want to give a lot of spoilers about the plot of the book, but as soon as I read that you had the third child born before you ever had gone to, I was going to go, okay, so some of this can't be full autobiographical because so much of the storyline involves Diana's quest to become a mom. And so you were already a mom when you had gone there. Right. So how much of that, did you know that was really going to be the driving force, or were you kind of considering other things that Diana was going to be struggling with, including some of her other issues as far as being in this place out of her country, following her husband? Did you know that going in, or did you kind of feel that out as you went?
I was looking for someone who had a reason to go to Vanuatu that suited the country. You know, someone who wanted a peaceful place. Mm-hmm. And so that was the idea I came up with. Yeah, I was going to say something else, but I forgot it.
That's okay.
That's what happens. Yeah. So Nicki, I hate to cut us short, but we are out of time. Congratulations on the book.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And I will just say, this is a gorgeous cover.
Isn't it? Ooh, we all have ours.
Well, She Writes Press is very good. I mean, they let us sort of choose, but they guide us all along the way. So I was happy with what they did.
Yes, it is lovely. So thank you, Nicki, for being here. Everybody who's watching live, thank you for watching. Check out Nicki's website. It's scrolling underneath. If you are watching this or just listening to it later on, her website will be in the show notes. Thank you, Allison, as always, for being my Vox Vomitus Vixen. Thank you to Pam Stack and everybody at the Global Authors on the Air Radio Network. Thank you to Roman Sroten, our producer. And tune in next week, next Wednesday night, when we have Keelan Patrick Burke, and we're going to be talking about his latest book, The House on Abigail Lane, and just general creepy writing. So the general creepiness of it. So thank you, everybody, and we will see you next week.